Hey everybody, my name's Ryan, and here at eTrailer we install, test fit, and review a lot of different parts. That way we can try to answer any questions those of you might have. And that's exactly what we're doing here today on our 2018 Jayco Greyhawk Motorhome. We're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SumoSprings for the rear axle. So as we all know, when it comes to suspensions on motorhomes, they're anything but responsive. And that can be really frustrating. You made this big investment and it's really not pleasant to drive it down the road. You really have to focus, hold on to that wheel tight, and honestly, for me, that's the last thing I want to be doing on my vacation. And that's where the SumoSprings are really going to come into play. They're really going to help support that rear axle, and what that's going to do is eliminate a lot of that side-to-side movement. These motorhomes are big old boxes, catch wind, real top heavy. And so they're really going to help eliminate all that and make your ride much more comfortable and predictable. Now, before we install our SumoSprings, what I like to do is get in the motorhome and run it through our test course to see how it does. That way we can kind of have a before and after. Now, with that being said, I did take a peek under the motorhome already, and it's already equipped with upgraded sway bars and a steering stabilizer. So I'm really curious to see how it's going to perform, especially after we get the SumoSprings on, to see how they're going to work in conjunction and if there's a major improvement. I know in the past, when I've just done SumoSprings, it was a huge improvement. So a little curious to see on how it's going to work with everything. I think it'll turn out really well. But with that being said, let's go for a spin, kind of straighten out here. And the first thing we're going to do is run through our bumps course. I'll slowly go over these bumps. And the suspension actually feels relatively good, but what I'm noticing after a couple of those bumps, the motorhome feels really top heavy. You can really feel it kind of going side to side. So I think there's definitely room for improvement there, and that's what the SumoSprings should accomplish. Now let's go ahead and run through our slalom course. Now I know in the past, this is where these SumoSprings really shined and kind of the most real-world driving experience. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and pick up some speed, and I'll start to make some sharp turns. And after these first couple, I will say, even with the current suspension upgrades that are already on, still definitely room for improvement. After that first turn or two, you can really feel the motorhome getting top heavy and wanting to lean to one side, and kind of feels like everything just wants to tilt or throw you over to the side. So definitely room for improvement. I think it could be a little more responsive and a lot better. So if we compare the factory style jounce bumper to the SumoSpring, right away you can tell that there's a huge difference. The factory style jounce bumper, more or less, that's not going to provide us with any type of support or anything like that. That's there to just prevent our suspension from completely bottoming out. And the SumoSpring is going to do much more than that. It's going to fill up that space between our frame and our axle and pretty much provide us with that continuous support that we're really looking for. So this is what these SumoSprings going to look like once it's installed. And it is extremely simple, and that's what I really love about these. It's going to be no maintenance at all required. So once you have them up, you're not going to have to worry about them, unlike some airbags where you're going to have to constantly kind of check on them and adjust the pressures. These are going to always be here whenever you need them. Now, the way these work is they're going to fill that void, that space in between the bottom of your frame rail and your rear axle tube. Now, usually the space would be a little bit tighter than this. However, we still have our motorhome jacked up a little bit so we can actually kind of show you what's going on and see down here. But if you get the picture, what will happen is every time you hit a bump or your motorhome starts to roll from one side or the other, the SumoSpring is going to absorb that energy and help push it to the other side of our vehicle. So they're going to work independently, and what that's going to do is help keep everything leveled out and keep your tires on the ground and provide you with that comfortable ride that you're looking for. These are progressive, and that's one thing I really do like about them. So what that means is, say if you take a turn a little too hard and you just need the extra support, just a little bit of it, these are going to give that to you. and not be real rough or anything like that. However, if you hit a big bump or really take a wide sweeping turn and the motorhome really wants to lean, these are going to give a lot more support. So it kind of works with the motorhome and the driving situation that you would currently be in. Now that has an advantage compared to some of the other type of suspension enhancements that are similar to this. Some of those are pretty much all or nothing. So whenever you don't need them, they're going to be there, and that can kind of make a rough ride, kind of a bumpy ride, like a really stiff pickup truck almost, and that's really not what we're looking for whenever we don't need them. Great whenever we do, but uncomfortable when we don't. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. We have a more or less a self-adjusting suspension enhancement that's there when we need it and not when we don't. And that's really going to help keep everything nice and level and comfortable when we're going down the road. So now that we have our SumoSprings installed, let's go back through our test course and see how our motorhome performs. So I'm going to get going. We'll straighten out here. And we hit our first couple of bumps. And I'm actually pretty impressed. I was a little bit skeptical with the suspension components already having upgrades done to them, but the SumoSprings feel like they're actually helping quite a bit, especially with the body roll, so the amount of movement our motorhome moves side to side. Don't get me wrong, it's still there, but I think it's safe to say it's probably reduced by half at least, and when we do get it, it feels like it's recovering a lot faster. So as opposed to it kind of lingering before where it wants to keep going a few times before it flattens out, you get maybe one or two and then it's straight on path again. So definitely an improvement over our bumps course. Now let's go ahead and do some evasive maneuvering and see if the SumoSprings help there. So pick up a little bit of speed and start to turn, and again, pleasantly surprised. Just like the bumps, this is a lot better, way less body roll, and it's kind of hard to explain, but you can almost feel them back there working. You can feel that extra support, if that makes sense. And thinking about it, we have all these improvements with upgraded suspension components already, and so without those other components being upgraded, I feel like these would shine even more. You could really tell a difference. But in all honesty, as a complete package as well, they really add that support that was missing, that little bit extra. You know that your motorhome could ride a little bit better, and these definitely did the trick. So regardless of your situation, I think they're really going to help you out, and you'll really enjoy your ride that much more. Now that we ran our motorhome through the test course and see how it performed, let's go ahead, pull it in the shop, and I'll walk you through how to get the springs installed. So to begin our installation, we're going to be working underneath the back of our motorhome. So here's our rear tires, just inside of them, more or less. Now what you want to do is use your leveling jacks to raise the back of your motorhome up. And what I did was raise it up enough to where the tires just want to come off the ground, and then I stopped at that point. You want to make sure that you have your wheels chalked, and you also want to make sure that you have floor jacks underneath the motorhome just to be on the safe side. So underneath our motorhome, the very first thing that we're going to need to do is remove our factory Johns bumper, which is this small piece right here. The Johns bumper is going to be attached to the bottom of your frame rail with one nut, and that's going to be a 15 millimeter. And that's just on top of the frame rail right here on the inside. That nut's a little tricky to see, but it's actually pretty easy to get to. So I'll take a 15 millimeter wrench and get it removed. So once you have the nut off, you're able to pull down on that Johns bumper and completely remove it. With this released, I'll just set it off to the side as we won't be reinstalling it. Now what we can do is you want to grab one of your SumoSprings and your bracket. Now these brackets are side specific, so be aware of that. In our case, we're on the passenger side, so we have the passenger side bracket. So what I'm going to do is actually attach the bracket to the Sumo spring. And the hole that we're going to be using is this one right here. So the way this bracket goes up, this will bolt to the bottom of the frame. That's the hole that's going to be closest to the back of your motorhome. So just to kind of give you a reference there, I put a little yellow dot there. So that's just going to line up with the threaded hole in the Sumo spring. We're going to take our short bolt. I'll get that started by hand at first. And I'll come in with a 9/16 socket and just snug it down. And then what we're going to want to do is take a torque wrench and torque it to the amount specified in the instructions. Now that we have our setup assembled here, I just kind of want to explain how it's going to work and get bolted up, because it is a little tricky to see, but it's really straightforward. So this is going to sit flat against the bottom of our frame, and you want the side that's open, so this side, to face towards the center of the motorhome. This stud here is going to go through that original hole that our factory John's pumper used to get secured. So once we push that through there and hold it up, we're going to take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut and get that started by hand. That way it'll stay up there, and once we are at that point, we can come back and tighten this nut down. So we'll go ahead and line up the stud on our bracket with the hole in our frame. Hold it up there flat. Get our flat washers over that stud. Take our nylon lock nut. We'll get that started by hand. And then we can come back with a 9/16 wrench and tighten it down until it's nice and firm. So once you have the passenger side done, you're simply going to come over here to the driver's side and repeat that exact same process. Then what I suggest doing is taking your motorhome for a spin and see if you're happy with the results. Now, if you feel like you could use a little more support, SumoSprings actually provides us with a 1-inch spacer block, which is this here. And what that's going to do is lower that Sumo spring down even closer to your axle tube. So if that's something that you want to do, you could simply remove that bolt that holds the Sumo spring in, take the spacer block, put it on top of the Sumo spring and on the bottom side of the bracket, and then you're just going to use the longer bolt that's provided to secure everything back together. So really straightforward and easy if that's something you wish to pursue. However, I do suggest starting without the spacer block. A lot of times you'll be amazed on how much support these can provide without it, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Sumo springs for the rear axle on our 2018 Jayco Greyhawk Motorhome.